Let's be honest, like it's 2025, rent is really high. The economy is all over the place. People are living in fear of their jobs and things like that. And it is nice to be able to have some type of cushion or help with when it comes to like splitting your rent. I'm sure that some of you watching and listening that you're like, hey, like we have pretty good boundaries. I think we'd be able to uphold it. We'd have two separate bedrooms, separate bathrooms, all these different things. And like, that's great that you want to honor God, but I think that you're going to be even more kind of comforted and feel his presence as we're talking through this really important topic.
What's up, fam? Welcome back to our channel. My name is Tim. This is my beautiful wife, Pauline, and you're tuning into another episode of the W Podcast where you get wisdom in the word with the
Wheelers.
Hey, so today we are excited because we're talking about one of those taboo topics, low-key in the church, that a lot of people are doing, but not a lot of people talk about, and that is, should Christian couples live together before they get married? And this is going to be a very honest, very biblical and personal conversation that we're going to have today. Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, and if that's you, if you're a Christian and you are living with your boyfriend or girlfriend, we're so glad that you're here. We want you to know up front that this is not going to be an episode that's going to shame you and tell you all the reasons why what you're doing is wrong. Yeah, because listen, we've all been there where you're considering things and you don't know what's right or wrong because it's just simply not, written out plainly in the Bible. And honestly, you probably know a lot of people who are doing that, who are living with their boyfriend or girlfriend, or who did do that and now they're married, and it's like, okay, well, it worked out for them. They made it down the aisle. Maybe it's like not that bad. And let's be honest, like it's 2025, rent is really high. The economy is all over the place. People are living in fear of their jobs and things like that. And it is nice to be able to have some type of cushion or help with when it comes to like splitting your rent and splitting bills and things like that. And that's real. Like, we're not trying to deny that. And I feel like that's a lot of the reasons why people kind of justify or say why they make the decisions that they make. Or maybe that's you when it comes to living with your partner, is like, hey, it's cheaper, I'm from out of town, I can't live with my parents, or whatever that is. But for those of you who are considering making that decision and you haven't made it yet, and this obviously applies to those who you're in that situation now too, is really like, we want to share what we've learned and what we've seen can happen with other couples, not because we're like trying to put any fear in you, but just because we want you to be aware. Like, obviously you're going to make the decision that you want to make and you feel is best. And like, we are not the type of people to try to convince anybody of anything. Like, either you want to learn or you don't. And like, but if you're watching this podcast, you're listening to this podcast, it's because you're curious, and we want to share with you what we have learned and seen and kind of assessed. We did not live together, before we got married. And I thank God for that every day, because I think it has just set us up to really just honor God the most, and like kind of keep God at the center of our relationship instead of our own reasoning and our own kind of understanding. And it's really important too, just because God doesn't say in black and white in the Bible, do this, don't do that, doesn't mean that he doesn't have an opinion on a matter. And I really do believe that by the end of this episode, you will walk away knowing like, God really does care about this. He does care who I live with. He does care about my boundaries, even if we've never had sex. And I'm sure that some of you watching and listening that you're like, hey, like we have pretty good boundaries. I think we'd be able to uphold it. We'd have two separate bedrooms, separate bathrooms, all these different things. And like, that's great that you want to honor God. But I think that you're going to be even more kind of comforted and feel his presence as we're talking through this really important topic.
Yeah, and we're hoping that this conversation can really save your relationship in the future.
Yeah.
And give you peace. Yeah. That you're making the best decisions possible. Because obviously, if you're dating somebody, most times, if you're dating them and you've already started talking about engagement, or you're thinking about marriage, like, you're hoping that it ends in marriage. Obviously, there's people who date and they're just out here dating to date. They just like being with somebody. And that is a separate conversation. But for someone who is thinking long term, we want to give you that peace that the long term will work out in the way that you're hoping. And Pauline already started going there a little bit, talking about the realness of whether it's trying to have a cheaper rent or you just want to be close with your partner, like emotionally, you're like, this is the person I love. Like, why can't I share a home with them? Or there's people who are on the other side and they're just like, we're basically married already.
Yeah.
Like, we know we're going to get married. What's the big deal? And I feel like that's so interesting because I remember you had a coworker.
Yeah.
Who he was cohabiting with his girlfriend, and then they got but they were engaged when you met him, maybe.
Yeah.
And
no, they weren't. They got engaged while we were working.
They got engaged, but then they get married too while you were working there.
They got married after he left. So, but yes.
Okay, but you had the conversation with him. What I'm trying to get to is he asked you, is marriage, like, what's the difference? What's the conversation you had with him when you were talking about?
I hope, because to be honest, a lot of my coworkers were the people that they were dating.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think I know what you're talking about. We were in the car coming from lunch, and we were already married, and it had come up while I was working there that you and I did not live together before we got married, but like literally all of them did. Every single one of I think all of my coworkers were in relationships, and they were all living with their partners. And I was the only. Well, me and another coworker were married and obviously living with our spouses, but everybody was like coupled up and living with somebody. And then on the car ride home, one day had come up randomly. I don't know why, but he had asked me like, "Oh, why didn't you and Tim live together before we got married?" Yeah, and it just kind of shows like it's so culturally normal. Like it's very much. I even saw this thing on Threads yesterday that was so cute. It was like this little montage of like stages of a relationship, and it showed like it was all faceless couples and like them going out on dates, and like it was like shots of them at the movies and like eating takeout together, like cute stuff. And then the next one was them, and I've noticed that it was like then it was marriage, then babies, and then like them kind of being old together. And then the second one was them like showing keys and like moving in together. And I was like, wait, this isn't in right order. I was like, you don't move in together right after you start dating and before you get the ring and get engaged and get married. But I was like, oh wow, like I keep forgetting this is not a Christian post or like Christian people, so like but that's what's culturally normal. And obviously we see it in shows and like in the media too, where like if you really, the next natural step of commitment is moving in together. But yeah, so he had asked me about that, like, oh, why didn't you do that, as if like it was abnormal. And that just goes to show right there, I guess, and that was like almost 10 years ago, that if
10 years is strong.
Well, maybe 7.
It was
6. Okay, you're right. 6. I keep forgetting how we were just started dating 10 years ago. But that just goes to show that if that's what's culturally normal, then we as Christians should most likely be doing the opposite of that. If that's what dating culture is living together before marriage, before engagement, before anything serious.
Yeah, you talked about how it's just becoming more and more commonplace, and like that's just true. There's research, and you can look it up yourself. There was an article I was reading from Focus on the Family talking about how in 1970 there was like about 1% of households who cohabitated.
Yeah, and then it was very faux pas.
2005, that's a long time, 1970 to 2005, but it went up to 6%. And then from 2005 to 2021, which is a less gap, it went up to 11%. So it almost doubled within.
I thought it would be a lot higher than that.
Well, that was 2021, 11%. Of family households have cohabitated, and I think this is people who maybe cohabitated and then got married is what that percentage is.
Fair, because I guess that's the hard thing about cohabitating. It is like it's a what do you call it? A stage that you move through. So you either get married or you break up. But you can't. I mean, there are people who would have common law marriages and stay together for 20, 30, 40 years. But that's even, more rare. But most of the time it's not something that, is an endless state.
Yeah. And we'll get into it later in the podcast, but some of the dangers that you can find if you research is cohabitating really doesn't set you up long term for a healthy relationship, one that 20, 30 years from now, you're still with the person you moved in with before marriage. And we'll unpack that. But it's so interesting because a lot of people are like, cohabitating not in the Bible. Mm-hmm. Same thing as dating's not in the Bible. Right. So how can we talk about it? Marijuana's not in the Bible. Like there's so many different, it's not in the Bible when we're trying to justify things that we want to do. There was a guest pastor yesterday. What was the word he was using?
Herb.
No. He was just talking in general about what Christians try to do. Negotiate, was that the word he used?
Oh yeah, negotiating your sacrifice or your.
Yeah, it's just interesting. A lot of times we can try to negotiate with God. Well, I'm not doing this, or if I do it like this, is that okay? And we just got to be careful of that. I just want to read a verse that kind of sets the foundation for why we believe how we believe, as far as it's not best for Christian couples to cohabitate before marriage. And the Bible says this. Obviously, it doesn't say don't cohabitate, but it says in Proverbs 1:7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. And the reason why I think this is important is because, one, if you don't have a desire to honor the Lord and take him seriously, then you're going to think anything we're saying right now is stupid. Like, y'all don't get it. Tariffs, the economy, like, it's too expensive just in general to live separately away from your partner. Or y'all don't get it. If this is the person I love, I feel like I should be with them. And like, that's how you feel. That's how you feel. But if you're somebody who's saying, I want to honor the Lord and take what he says seriously, because that's all that fear of the Lord means, is to honor him, have deep respect for him, and believe what he says and take it seriously, then we got to slow down a little bit. I think that's something that we don't do enough, is slow down when it comes to our decision making, and is like asking ourselves, like, is what we're doing really putting us in the best position to honor God? Right.
Because even, I mean, you mentioned that, like, okay, for a Christian couple, it's not best. I mean, to be honest, it's not best for any couple.
Right.
Not,
but
like, if you want to be married, if you want to have a long lasting marriage one day, it proves like just the emotional mindset of living together and giving somebody, you know, full access to you, benefits, all of those things. I'm not even talking about sexually, just more of like merging your life and your belongings in your space with someone that you don't, without them having like the commitment and you having the commitment, and to like protect and guard them is really dangerous. Just the same way you wouldn't like be have a roommate with just anyone, or hopefully you wouldn't just like live with someone off the street, because it's like, well, you have full access to me, I don't know you like that, to be able to trust you in that way. And that's kind of the issue too, because most likely if you're considering living together, you've crossed other boundaries. But anyway, all that to say,
well, let me just say, you kind of started hitting on something that I wanted to go into, because cohabitation is more of a wisdom issue than it is a sin issue. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of people, that's their whole thing. Well, it's not a sin.
Yeah.
Cohabitating is not a sin, and like, that's not our point.
Right.
Our point is the wisdom piece.
Best.
And that's why I read that verse, the fear of the Lord is beginning of knowledge. Yeah. Because when you have that fear of the Lord, it gives you a starting place of like, oh, like, what is best? Like, what does make sense? And it says after that, fools despise wisdom and instruction. So if you are not even trying to live for God, you're not even going to be able to comprehend how potentially cohabitating could not make sense. And it's the whole idea of you're putting yourself in a situation where you could sin and give yourself the opportunity to make a mistake that you don't want to make. That's the whole idea of like, let me pause and like think about this. And it's so interesting you were bringing up you wouldn't just live with anybody. Obviously there's people on here who have lived with anybody, whether it be because of college and you got a random selection which you probably hated, or maybe it worked out for you. But there's people who also maybe just fall on hard financial times. It's like, yo, I just need a roommate to make things cheaper. So obviously that happens. But one of the things that you've learned from living with somebody, whether it's siblings or a random person, is you can't control what you see. Because I feel like that's a lot of the things that happen. I just thought about a crazy story. But that's one of the things that happen when you live with somebody and you're Christian and you're like, well, we're not going to have sex before marriage. And it's like, we have good boundaries. You brought that up. And we know how to like control ourselves. And why can't Christians just control themselves? And it's like, it's not really about that. It's more about the things that you can't control.
Yeah.
So I wasn't even going to go here, but the story I was talking about was I had a friend who in college had a roommate, and he just walked in the house one day, and the guy just decided to be booty butt naked, and he was just in the fridge, like, and my roommate's like, bro, what is this?
Right.
And like, there's so many times where I think about things, even with people that I room with, coming up before we got married. There was things that I heard, things that I saw that I would have never seen and never heard if I had not been living with them. And it wasn't even that I was looking for those situations. It wasn't that I wanted to see those situations. It wasn't that we talked about not seeing those situations. That's just the normal things of life. Like, there's so many times where I walk in on you doing something, you walk in on me doing something, where it's getting dressed, going to the bathroom, eating, whatever it may be. You just see stuff more.
You learn, you never know somebody that well until you live with them. But this is my question: what do you say to the people who are watching? They're like, exactly, this is why I want to live with them, because I want to learn. I want to see what I'd be getting myself into. I want to see, fully who you are before I commit to marry you.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to bring up. Is somebody absolutely is thinking that, and that's the problem with our whole mindset. Going back to the beginning of knowledge, is because we don't realize that marriage is a covenant.
Yeah.
It's not a contract. It's not convenient.
Right.
And a lot of times we don't realize that our mindsets going into marriage are setting us up for failure before we even begin.
110%.
Like, we're going into it like, oh, I want to figure this out. And it's so interesting. I saw our pastor, he was doing a podcast, and he had a really cool analogy about people wanting to test drive the car.
Right.
Now, this is more sex per se than
living
together, but the whole idea of like, you want to test drive, you want to see and make sure it works, and it's like, well, you're only going to drive a car 7, 8, 10 years max, whereas you're talking about marriage, that's 40, 50 years. Like, you don't just test drive that. That's not something you can test drive. That's
you're not trading it in. Yeah.
Right. You're trying to build something that's going to last, not something that you're going to trade in for a better model later on.
And even so, I've heard people too, like, because that's really good, but building off of that, but hearing that, like, you don't test drive being a parent. Like, parenthood is a commitment. I don't know that if it's technically a covenant relationship, but it is obviously a relationship that the Lord establishes, and that is solidified through blood, through legal measures and things like that. Like, you can be the best babysitter of all time. You can be a nanny. You can be a children's worker. I don't care what. Nothing you do prepares you for parenting. Like, there are people who love kids, and like, they love everybody's kids, and they'll watch your kids, and they'll have a good old time, but you clock out. If you're an aunt, if you're a godparent, and like whatever you are, like, and nothing compares to being like the weight of being a parent, and there's nothing that can prepare you for it. And I really think that God does that on purpose. Like, even siblings, obviously you have younger siblings, and like, you helped, I'm gonna say you helped raise them, but you were around when they were growing up.
I was supposed to be a good influence and help guide them in some aspect.
Right, but like, and you have brothers who are a lot younger than you, like, you change their diapers, like all of those things where you're like, okay, I know what it's like to be around a baby or take care of a baby or drive people around and like kind of be this this influence, but it still doesn't compare to being a parent. And I don't think anything is supposed to prepare you for it or like compared to it. Like, it's something that's set apart, something that is a completely different league of its own. And I believe God said marriage to be the same thing. Like, dating is not supposed to mirror marriage in any way. It's not supposed to be something that you can get a full glimpse into. Either you're in or you're out. And it's the same thing with parenting. Like, there is no bringing the baby back. Like, you're here, like, you cannot return them. And I don't think that's the problem with marriage. Is like, I think a lot of us go into it saying like, okay, I'll try this out, and if it doesn't work out, I have an out. And it's like, no, you don't. That was not God's design. And like, literally the Bible says that like, God, that's not God's, his perfect plan does not include divorce.
What God brought together, let no man take apart. And we're going to get into what covenant means, because somebody may be listening to this and be like, what does that even mean? But I wanted to tie a bow on what we were talking about before, about just cohabitating, moving in, why it doesn't make sense practically. Because a lot of times our standards and Jesus' standards are not the same. Absolutely. And as Christians, obviously, we're supposed to be trying to be like Jesus and model our lives after Jesus. And it's funny because Jesus actually said this in Matthew 5:28, for those who are like, well, we can live together, have self-control, and not have sex. And it's like, sure, maybe you can do that. Maybe that actually is possible. But what I was saying earlier about how you can't control all the time exactly what you're going to see and not see in a relationship, or not even in a relationship, but once you move in with somebody, like, you can't control if you see somebody changing every single time. You can't control if you see them get out the shower every single time. And the reason I brought that up is because Jesus said in Matthew 5:28, "But I say, anyone who even looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart." And so often we're like, well, we're not going to have sex. We're not going to have adultery. We're not going to do this. And it's like, Jesus is like, bro, if you even look at somebody.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point of the wisdom piece. Going back to the first verse, talking about the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. When you have that understanding of, I don't even want to put myself in a position to dishonor God, you realize that if I put myself in a situation where me and my partner, who I say I'm attracted to, who I say I really like, if I see them butt naked, there's not going to be any part of me that lust. Honestly, that might be some concern there.
Right.
Like
they
nothing do it for you. Like, why are you with them now? And it's just like, all right, let's just be honest. Like, can we just be honest? If you want to live with your partner and you don't care what God says, then just be honest and say it. But a lot of times we don't. Some people don't want to be that bold.
Right. If you want to explain it away and say like, oh, certain things don't apply to me, because even like outside of that, like the emotional stuff matters too. It's not just about are we having sex or not. It's about, do you honor this person? Because it's either, this is your wife or this is your sister in Christ. Like, how are you like looking at her and treating her? And is it, are you taking ownership, saying like, oh, well, I'm gonna, our bills are gonna be on the same stuff together, or I'm gonna, cook dinner for her every night. Like, that's getting into weird, like, husband wife territory. Even if you are sleeping in separate rooms, even if you are not having sex emotionally, you're already in an inappropriate relationship. You're having some type of like weird, you're not having boundaries where it's like, all right, I'm saying good night, you're saying good night, there's separation.
Well, why don't you read this part? Because I feel like you're kind of starting to go into that.
Oh, okay. So he's talking about the difference between covenant and...
Well, not even that. Just the marriage is that part. So I wanted you to explain the difference between covenant and convenience. That part is, I feel like you were starting to go
covenant
there.
And convenience. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of it is because if we're talking about like the reason why you live together, and if you're saying like, oh yeah, we both love God, but the reason why this works for us is because of money, and because she lived so far and she got a new job, and like her new job was close to me, and my roommate had just moved out and the lease was about to be up and I couldn't handle the lease on my own. Like all these different things, it's all down to convenience. And like at the end of the day, God does call us to take up our cross and follow him, and a lot of things that God asks us to do. And like, if anyone ever told you that following God, especially dating, is supposed to be easy and convenient, you were lied to. So many times I remember when we were dating, things that we had to do, and you've told the story plenty of times on the podcast of us like, having to stay in separate rooms and drive to things separately and pay extra money for things. And this is why we didn't go on really any trips, because it was extremely inconvenient. All the times you had to drive me home and then drive back to your mom's house, 45 minutes several times during the week, because we were honoring God.
And even saying that, we still had a lot of fun in our relationship.
Of course.
And like, that's what we really strive to do with our podcast and just all of our socials, is like, you can be fun and be holy.
Yes.
And we got a fun series coming later this summer talking about that whole aspect of what does that look like in each stage of relationship. But I just want to call it out, because sometimes we do talk about like it's not convenient, and that's absolutely true, but that doesn't mean it's not fun, and it can't be fun.
But also at the same time, like, sure, it's not convenient right now, but it'll be convenient later. Like, we've been married for almost 7 years, and Tim hasn't had to drive me home by himself since. Like, the 2.5 years of us dating and sacrificing in that way, obviously there's inconveniences in marriage now where like you're really serving each other and really going out of your way in a lot of detailed ways. And that's the thing too, like there's no way you're living with someone and not treating them like your spouse, even if you're not having sex. There's no way that you guys are not sharing groceries, that you're not cooking for them, that you're not, cleaning up after each other, that you're not...
What's the problem with that? Because somebody could be watching and be genuine.
You don't have emotional boundaries. Now you're becoming attached, and like, you're you're kind of melding yourself, becoming one emotionally with someone that you shouldn't be. The same reason why like work husbands and work wives are inappropriate, even though you're not having sex, you're not touching each other. You're creating this bond with someone and you're putting them in a role they're not supposed to be in.
So I get that, but what if somebody's listening to this is their first time hearing something like this, and they're like, but isn't that the point of dating? Aren't we supposed to be getting to know each other and like coming together?
Well, yeah, you absolutely can get to know somebody, and you should get to know somebody that you're dating with, but within boundaries. It has to still be appropriate. You don't want to put too much weight on a relationship. The same reason why like you can have fun and go out and build a relationship, or like for us, we're parents, like we have little boys, we have, you know, a 4-year-old, and like as much as I love going out with him and taking him out to ice cream, I'm not going to give him the car keys and say, hey, drive us there. Like he's not capable of handling that type of responsibility.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times with God, we don't realize like he's trying to protect us.
Yeah.
Because he knows more than us. Yeah. And I think the real issue, if you're asking that question and you're genuinely like, I really don't get why this doesn't make sense, is even though you may really believe that the person you're with, you're going to be with forever.
And that may be true.
You still don't have, at this moment in time, if you're not married, the covenant aspect of, I'm not going to leave you, I'm with you. And I don't just mean that in a contractual sense, but I mean that in a relational and personal sense.
In a safety thing. That's
what separates a covenant from a contract, is the obligation and commitment that you gave to somebody, and the relational and personal exchange that this isn't just some random person that I'm doing this with. It's like, no, like if something goes down, if you lose, I lose.
Right.
Whereas in dating, like if you break up, this is interesting. I didn't even think about this. When you're married and you get divorced, if that happens, unfortunately, you both lose.
Right.
Even if you feel like you're going to gain something later, in the moment, nobody goes through a divorce and it's like that process of a divorce is actually like happy and a fun time. Like even people who are glad they did get divorced, that actual process of getting divorced is messy and painful. And that's because when you end a covenant, both people lose because you're not supposed to end the covenant.
You're pulling apart, yeah.
But when you're dating, there's no covenant. So somebody can get out of a dating relationship and technically not lose. Like they can just move out when you guys are living together and there's a lease, but your name is actually on the lease. Their name isn't. Now you're messed up because you got to pay for that rent that you were trying so desperately to split with somebody, and they don't have any obligation. They don't owe anything to you to help you pay it. Like that's an extreme example, but I hope you get the picture that we're painting here of it is possible to be less protected even though you're trying to protect yourself more. So a lot of people cohabitate because they want to protect themselves. I want to see
short term,
how this is going to work out.
Yeah.
And they don't realize that if it doesn't work out, they're putting themselves in more jeopardy emotionally.
Right.
And that's something you want to be mindful of, because convenience, just to give a definition to that, is the state of being able to proceed with something with little effort or difficulty. Mm-hmm. So it's easy to move in with somebody you're not married to. It's also easy to leave.
Yeah.
Whereas when you get married, it's harder to get married in some respects, and it's definitely harder to get out of a marriage from a legal standpoint.
Right.
So that's just the difference. And a lot of times cohabiting is the easy way out because it doesn't require you to fully commit to someone if you don't like them anymore. All you have to do is break your lease. All you got to do is say, I'm out.
Right.
And just circling back, because I wanted to make sure we said this, because I think it's a really great analogy that you came up with. Even if you're like, yo, the person that I'm trying to move in with, I'm not even dating them. It's just like, we opposite sex, but like we just cool. Obviously, it opens the door to temptation.
Yeah.
And it's just, there's an analogy that it's like fasting in a Chick-fil-A kitchen.
Yeah.
Or not even the restaurant, but you in the kitchen where they making stuff.
Bar.
You're in the kitchen where they're making stuff, and you're seeing everything, and you're getting hungry, and it's just like, why you didn't put yourself in that situation?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a hard thing to do, and it's something that if you really want to honor God, it's okay that it's hard. Like, it's okay to be honest with yourself, saying, like, I really want to do this. This seems like it makes the most sense to me. But, like, God's ways are higher than our ways. And if it doesn't make sense to you, that doesn't mean that God's not calling you to do it. And he's asking, you to trust him with this. Because I love what you said, like, God's trying to protect us. Like, he knows better than we know. And if you want him to bless your relationship, you have to do what he says. You cannot think like, oh, I'm above his rules and then go ask him for help. And he's like, I can't help you because you stepped outside of, my wisdom and my instructions and my, my understanding.
Yeah. So let's go a little bit deeper, babe. I'm going to ask you or state 3 cultural arguments that people would have. And I just want you to give why it's actually not best.
Okay.
So I'm going to present the argument that people are going to say, like, this is why we should cohabitate. And then I want you to share why it's probably not best. So the first thing is, obviously we talked about it already a little bit, but it saves money. That's the big argument for why cohabitating makes more sense in 2025 versus whenever, the biblical times or anything like that.
Biblical times, which could still be now. Yeah, I mean, it saves you money, but it definitely costs you peace, because if you're wondering, like, okay, is this really the person that God has for me? Is this really my spouse? You have no space. You have no space when you live with somebody, like emotionally too. And like, it's interesting because when you have a roommate, which I've had several roommates in my life before getting married, where it's like, you have separation with them. Like, oh, you have your room, I have my bathroom, you have yours. This is where I keep my stuff. Like there are boundaries, because you're like, we are not one. Like my stuff is not your stuff. Like I have my space. Sure, you have maybe identify certain things are okay sharing, like the TV or the couch and like furniture or whatever it is that you guys decide, but you have your space and you have they have theirs. And obviously in marriage, oh, this is my side of the closet, this is yours, those types of things. But even though when you wear your husband's clothes, but there's no separation in marriage.
Yeah, and I'm even thinking about, like, we know people who have had roommates and they literally had separate silverware. They're like, I'm not sharing a spoon with you. You're not going to be eating off my fork.
That's your right. This is my drawer where I keep my utensils. This is your drawer. And, like, that's what you do. It's separation. And, like, one day we're not going to be living together. I'm going to take my stuff and you're going to take yours and we'll go our separate ways. But marriage is not that way. And then, like, but that's the problem when you start living with somebody that you're romantically involved with, whether you're having sex or not. Those lines start to become very, very, very blurred, and you're borrowing stuff. Oh, can I have this? Well, this is yours. Can I wear it? Can I? All these different things. And it becomes, you start to feel one, even if you're not, and you're not. And it can be very hard if you are seriously trying to pursue God and ask God, God, yeah, we're not married right now, and I very much, respect marriage and honor marriage because you made marriage, and I don't want to be with somebody who you have not, who you don't want me to be with, essentially. But it's very, very, very hard to hear God clearly when you have no space, when you're constantly being suffocated by the person that you're living with, or you have no time away from them to hear. It can be very confusing to know, like, oh, is this my spouse that God has for me, or is this something that I'm like inappropriately emotionally attached to? And the same thing happens when you're having sex, even if you're not living together.
Well, that's how we get to the next part, where somebody could say, we're basically married.
Right.
Already. But
what is your idea of marriage? Marriage is more than just the practical things of like, oh, well, we share.
Some people say it's just a piece of paper.
Right. And if that's how you feel, then that's not how God feels. God does not feel that marriage is just a piece of paper. So again, this is for people who call themselves Christians and who love God and who want God to be at the center of their lives and the center of their marriage and the center of their relationships, their dating lives. Like, that's who this is for. So if you find yourself kind of feeling like, oh, well, this is my idea of marriage, this is my idea of what dating should look like, it should include cohabitating, it should include living together like my parents did it. This is all I've known. I've lived with a lot of different people. Everybody in my family has lived with somebody before. They've gotten married. But it's very painful. And like, if that's the case, you've seen plenty of people have to break up and move out. And not only now are you dealing with the emotional divorce of breaking up with somebody that you were sleeping with, who you are planning a life with, but now you have to go and deal with the practical side of trying to find a new place to live and your stuff and all of that. Like, that's not, like, God doesn't want you to be going through a divorce every time you break up with somebody.
Yeah, and even on the spiritual side, because you mentioned that's even if somebody thinks that marriage is just a piece of paper, that's not how God thinks about it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times we don't realize that, or we forget that marriage is actually supposed to be, when it's between two Christians, a man and a woman who are married, we do forget that it's supposed to be a representation of how Christ loves the church and is married to the church, meaning us. And it's so interesting because God is like, I'm bringing these two people together. Let no man take it apart. They're now becoming one flesh. And we don't realize that that's how God is viewing marriage. Like, God is never like Jesus would leave the church. Jesus would take away and just rip apart from the church. And I think that's one of the reasons why divorce is so something that the Lord doesn't like, is because he's like, I never want somebody that's joined together into one to have to be torn apart. I don't want that pain.
Painful.
And we don't realize that God wants that intimacy of oneness with somebody to be in marriage, because there it's supposed to be protected, because unless there's death, as long as you two are living, you're never going to tear apart, just like Christ is never going to leave his church. So I just think that that's something to really consider. Now, I feel like we already touched on the test run part, so I kind of want to jump into the next part. You mentioned why we didn't live together. It's interesting because before I got saved, just being transparent, I definitely think I would have lived with the person that I was dating. Like 100%, I definitely think I would have. And really just because, why not? Like, why would I get married?
Yeah, practically it makes sense.
And a lot of times, some of that was for me because of I was young. So it's like, you look at marriage as something you do when you're older. Even though you feel like this is the person you want to marry, you're still like, I ain't about to do that right now. Like, let me move in with them, get all the benefits of that. And then maybe at some point we'll get married. And it's just so interesting that if you don't have that biblical worldview, sometimes you can fall into that. But obviously there's people who still are considering themselves as Christians and still want to move in with the person that they're dating. For you, why was that not an option? Was it just because you just heard so many people say, because you just said that if you weren't, before you got saved, you would have cohabitated.
Yeah.
So why the switch?
Because I mean, it's my view of marriage changed a lot.
Talk about that.
And I mean, I always wanted to get married, and knew that was like a natural kind of like progression or desire or whatever. But I think that I viewed living together before marriage, when I was in high school, I viewed it as something that was like kind of a quicker route to get to marriage, and realizing like, okay, well, if you live together, that means that you're committed to me, and that like, but I also did the same thing about sex. So then when I learned that that was a lie, that just because you have sex with somebody doesn't mean that they're, like extra committed to you or committed to you at all, like, well, then that must mean that cohabitating, and also learning again what God's heart is for marriage, and just learning how fiercely the Lord sacrifice for us, for me, and realizing like, wow, Jesus gave it all on the cross without any guarantee. Like, there was no, I'm gonna die for you, but you gotta promise you gonna die for me after. Like, it was just like, I'm doing this just for the opportunity, for you to, if you ever one day decide that you want to be with me, the option is there for you. I'm gonna leave this here on the table, and then you come and get it whenever you want to. Realizing that, like, that reckless type of love, and like realizing like, cohabitating is so selfish. It's so much like, take God out of it. It's so much about, I want to get what I want, and I want to make sure that I'm gonna have it, whether that is security, that's what it would have been for me. It was like knowing like, okay, like I have access to you. I love you, you love me, you want to see me, you want to be with me, you don't want to have to say goodbye to me every day. Like, I want to feel wanted. I want to know that you want to be with me all the time. And like, that's selfish. Like, I'm not, and maybe some people do have that mindset, and like kind of in a deceptive way, like, oh, I want to move in with him so that like I can cook for him and clean for him and serve him and do all those things. And like, he's so busy. He works so hard. Like, he needs a wife. He needs, he needs someone to do all those things for him. And it's like, well, why does it have to be you? Like, you're not his wife. So like, until you are his wife, then it would, yes, become your honor and your privilege to serve your boyfriend in that way, and he would be your husband at that point. But like, it's also, I think for me, was really getting the fresh revelation of what marriage is to God, what he made it to be like, and then realizing anything else below that is just hogwash. Like, dating is fun, and it obviously is like culturally relevant and emotionally, and like all of those things, it's a process, but like it does not hold a candle to marriage. Like, you cannot come to me talking about, oh yeah, like it really actually started to bother me after I got saved, and after I started to pursue God's heart for marriage and for relationships, after my own heartbreak and my own just my own kind of process. But it really started to bother me when people would say, like, oh yeah, if I was around couples and like there was a married couple, oh yeah, we've been married for 7 years, and oh yeah, well, I've been with my boyfriend for 7 years, like the same thing. No, it's not. It's just really not. Like, and you will sometimes like make fun of me talking when people are like, oh yeah, we've been together for 10 years but married for 3, but we've been together for 10 years. I'm like, you've been married for 3 years. Like, it's okay. Like, obviously if you're telling the story of like, oh, how we met and like, whatever, that's fine. Yeah, you met each other 10 years ago, but like, don't equate like your time dating is not lumped in with, and it's not equivalent to your time married. Like, spiritual things happen, emotional things happen, physical things happen, obviously, when you're married, because there is a big deal in like the whole like, I'm not leaving, like this is forever, I'm not going anywhere. And that's the other thing I want to talk about or bring up when you were mentioning about privacy when you're cohabitating, like the things that you see and how you cannot kind of like, maybe you do as much as you can to like guard your eyes and stuff and like sleep in separate rooms.
Hey, I'm in the bathroom. Hey, don't come in here. Like that type of like.
I'm sure. Whoa. But it's also like, you may do that for the first couple of weeks, but that's not lasting forever. Let's just be honest. Because even you do that with your roommates, platonic roommates, where you're like, all right, I know that she takes a shower at XYZ time. You're noticing each other's habits and you like avoid certain things. But then you're like, oh, well, I've seen you, in a towel once. Like, I've seen you in a towel twice. Like, it's kind of like you lose the sacredness of it. But what I was going to say is, now I'm going to forget.
Privacy.
I don't remember.
My bad. It'll come back to you. But as strongly as Pauline was saying how passionate she is about marriage and about the sanctity of it, that same passion I know she feels where if you're watching this and you find yourself already cohabitating with somebody, that there's no shame.
Yeah.
There's just an opportunity for you to pivot. If you're watching this and you feel some conviction, because there's a difference between conviction and condemnation. Conviction is always the Holy Spirit trying to get us to go back to the Father. Condemnation is always the enemy trying to push us away from the Lord, because he's like, you are not good enough. You knew you shouldn't have did this. The Lord don't want you anymore. All are lies, not true. So there's a couple options that you have if you find yourself in a situation where you're cohabitating and you're watching this now and you're like, I just don't feel like this is right anymore. First thing is obviously to move out. Now you're probably sitting there like, that sounds great.
Right.
Like, that sounds good.
Find me a place I can afford.
Right. And that's very real. And I think that it'll obviously be a process for a lot of people, especially if you don't have family in the area or you don't have enough money to just move out on your own. But the cool thing is that the Bible says that as we pursue the Lord, he pursues us. As we draw near to him, he'll draw nearer to us. And I think the faith aspect of, Lord, I want to move out. I need you to show me a way out. Mm-hmm. Trusting that he will do that and then following his steps, even if it don't make sense to you. Mm-hmm. Like, we have to believe that faith aspect as Christians, that the Lord is capable of showing and providing a way out. Right. And there's plenty of people who have been able to find ways out that have been cohabitating and been able to do it. Especially
if you have kids together, like that can make it more complicated. But I still stand 10 toes down on that like, if you guys do have children together and it makes it more complicated, I think like what a great opportunity for you to teach your kids and show your kids like how serious you are about honoring your relationship with God. And it's not a matter about like, oh, you're gonna see them less, even though like technically maybe you will, but I think it's more of like, if anything, it should increase your urgency to get married if that was a part of your plans already.
Yeah. And I've heard pastors say like there's some cases where if you're in a situation like that, you love each other, you've known each other, you have kids. Why not just get married tomorrow? Like, why not just go to the courthouse, get married, and be legally protected?
Yeah.
And as far as spiritually protected, like that's also an option. Like, I think sometimes we think, well, we got to have this grand wedding, and you can still do that
later,
but you can also get married first.
Yeah.
The second thing is you put set physical boundaries, spiritual boundaries. What exactly did you mean by that?
Well, I know that, there are people who, like, there is a separation. So if there is, like, okay, we sleep in the same bed together, like, we really are, like, acting like we're married. Well, there needs, there a step is to sleep in separate rooms. And then, like, is there an upstairs, downstairs situation until you can find, a more permanent solution of, like, all right, I'm gonna get my own place or move back home with my parents, or, like, bumming on the couch, like, with a friend or something like that. Like, there's things you can do today, whereas it's even like, okay, I want to sleep on the couch. Like, this is really convicting me. The Lord is really speaking to me on this matter, and that, like, I need to take action on this now. Like, what can I do today? Like, no, you cannot go get an apartment tonight, but, like, you can sleep on the couch and you can make a change. You can start, creating those boundaries where they should have been, and keep going. Don't just start there where you're still, like, sleeping on the couch 6 months from now if you don't have to be. But I think that, like, this is what I was going to say earlier about, like, the privacy and performance thing, because, like, even this, when you're living with somebody, and even if you are doing the whole, this is for people who are doing the whole, like, oh, well, I need to kind of test it out and see what they're like before I decide if I'm going to marry them or not. A lot of times, this is the problem, like, a couple of people, my old coworkers, like, they would live with their partners, and they see things about them that they don't like, and then they're like, well, I don't know if I want to commit to you snoring like that for the rest of my life. But guess what? Like, that's what marriage is. Like, a lot of times when you move in with somebody, you are going to find reasons to, like, you're going to see parts of them and sides of them. Like, there's stuff I learned about you, and there's stuff you learned about me after we got married and moved into it. We're like, oh, wow, you do that. Like, you use your toothpaste like that. You shower like that. And it's like, but there's no safety if it's in just a dating relationship, because you're constantly feeling judged. You are literally auditioning your life, where it's like, all right, well, I'm going to cook this for him or that for him. Does he like it? Is it good enough? Like, what does he think? What does she think? Like, is she going to leave me? Am I doing a good job? Versus when you're in marriage, it's like, oh, that's so silly, or that's gross, I don't like that. But it's like, I'm here. Like, we're going to figure it out. We're going to find our way of doing it, versus, like, thinking, oh, is he gonna leave because I put my towel on the floor instead of, like, that people really have that type of anxiety, and, like, the enemy that you're leaving the door open for the enemy just in your life and in your mental health by kind of putting yourself on this year-long audition of your entire life, all of your nasty habits that, by the way, everybody has. So even if you don't like what that specific boyfriend or girlfriend is doing, the next one is going to have their own versions of that.
Well, to that point, if somebody is listening to this and like, girl, you're confirming every reason why I absolutely want to cohabitate, because I want to see all of that stuff and be able to make a decision, yes or no, if I want to move forward. The problem is, how many times are you going to do that? Because there's, like Pauline said, the person that you're living with is always going to have some things that you don't like. And at what point do you get to a place where you're like, even though I don't like some things they do, I'm going to stay committed here? Yeah. Like, is it going to take 4 or 5 heartbreaks, 4 or 5 leases broken before you decide that covenant and just making a decision to stay with somebody through the good and bad is better than trying to test it out, getting your heart broke, being sad, going through the healing process, or not going through the healing process? Like, at what point do you make that decision? That's the part that is challenging to me.
Yeah. And I've heard other people talk about that with cohabitating too, where it's like, all right, well, if you're moving in to audition for you to audition and them for audition for you, at what point in the audition are you making a decision about, all right, this is the 3rd, 4th interview, this is the 3rd, 4th month, are people putting a timeline on it? Because a lot of people don't. They just move in together.
Well, that's the ambiguity.
Right. Like, because with an interview process, you say, hey, we're going to have 3 or 4 interviews. We're going to, we want you to talk to XYZ people, and then we're going to make a decision to see if you are the person that we want for this job. But when you live together, it's like, all right, let's move together for how long? 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years? How do you know when you've seen enough? Because you may see one bad habit, and then as you're looking at that bad habit, you turn your head and there's another one, and then they keep stacking and stacking and stacking, and you may feel like, all right, well, this is too much. Like, I didn't know you were doing all of this. I didn't know this is how, you live. And then are you going to tell someone, oh, I'm breaking up with you because your farts are too smelly? Like, that sounds very, like topical and like shallow. But I mean, that's the thing is like, now you're making decisions about your life and who you're going to marry and who you're going to have children with based off of bad habits that everybody has.
Yeah. So hopefully the messaging was clear through this, that we believe it's better. If you're considering, like, should I cohabitate? We definitely believe it's better not to. One, you don't set yourself up for the statistics that overwhelmingly say people who cohabitate later on
get divorced
if they even do get married. But then two, you realize from a spiritual perspective, there's something about me honoring the Lord and having enough fear of him, of like, I don't even want to put myself in a position to stumble.
Yeah.
That allows you to avoid potential mistakes and pitfalls, and knowing that he'll honor you and he'll bless you because you're just trying to honor him. But then the other part is, if you've already found yourself in that situation, knowing that it's not too late for you. Like, it's not too late for you to choose God, to choose his ways of like, all right, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to make different decisions. He can walk you through that. And when you do, just know that the Lord can restore whatever culture confused in your love life, in your dating process. And I wanted to read this verse, Psalms 37:23. I love it, through 24. The Lord directs the steps of the godly. He delights in every detail of their lives. Though they stumble, they will never fall, for the Lord holds them by their hands. So if you find yourself in a situation where you're turning back to the Lord and saying, I may have made some decisions that I didn't like, or that I know you don't like, Lord, but I want to recommit myself to you, he can absolutely direct your steps, whether that is for you to go to the courthouse tomorrow, whether that is for you to move out, whether that is for a friend who's going to randomly call you and say, hey, girl, I got this place where you I got this place where you can move in, or I got some money that I want to give you to help you with your rent. Like, you don't know how the Lord can order your steps
after you say yes.
Yeah. After you say yes.
Yeah. And trusting that, like, yeah, if you're just like, God foots the bill for things that he orders. And if you're telling God, like, I don't have a way to make this happen, but I'm giving you my yes, like, he will do his thing. Like, he's not going to say, like, oh, well, yeah, just go back home and, you don't have to follow my rules, or you don't have to do it my way because because you don't have enough money, or because you don't have a certain situation. Like, he will come in. Sometimes you have to wait, of course, and you have to do what you can do within your own power. But God he wants you to win. He wants you to do it his way. And sometimes his way, most of the time, doing things his way is not what we would think. Like, sometimes it does mean sleeping on a couch of your uncle, for a couple of months. Sometimes it does mean putting your stuff in storage and, moving back home with your parents. Like, it doesn't always mean, oh, I'm just going to get my own apartment and it's going to be this, I got a new job. And it's not always shiny, but then you're going to be able to look back and say, like, wow, like, I was really serious about my commitment to the Lord. And, like, how much more, will God say that too? And, like, the other thing too is, like, I don't know if you exactly said this phrase of sliding. Did you say sliding? Because that's the thing, because someone might think, like, oh, well, why do cohabitating couples, end up, have a higher rate of divorce? And it's because of this concept of sliding. And it's really what sliding is. It's like a lack of intentionality. Oh, well, we've been living together for 2 years. I guess we should just get married. Versus the whole, like, wow, I love this person. God, you have blessed this relationship. You have done so much. This is the person I want to be with. Lord, I'm going to, make the step and intentionally ask them to marry me. I'm going to intentionally, then there's just so much power behind intentionality. Because, like, when you intentionally ask somebody out on a date, which is, like, I saw this crazy stat, this is such a side note, of, like, less than, like, 30% of males between 18 and 25 have actually asked a woman out in person, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, not our sons. Like, you have to actually put yourself out there and be brave and be courageous and be open to rejection. And I say all that to say, because like when you do that, when it comes to dating and like proposing, but also that sets you up to be brave and courageous when you're married. So like people don't talk about how much every single step prepares you for the next. So like you are having boundaries. I'm not going to live with anybody who I'm attracted to that's not my wife, or it's not like a sibling or like, a friend or roommate, something like that, because I'm not going to put myself in those positions. And then if you have that boundary when you are single, you're going to have that boundary when you're married. So that means I'm not going to stay overnight with a woman that's not my wife, or, my sister, or somebody who I'm not attracted to that's in my family. And because when you have that lack of intentionality and that lack of boundaries, it seeps over. When you slide in and you live with somebody before you marry to them and I guess we'll just get married, those are the same people you don't honor covenant. They're the same ones who are like, oh, well, it doesn't matter if we get divorced because who cares? Marriage is marriage, like whatever, if it's just a piece of paper. So that's how it's all about your mindset and like what you think about God and about the things that he created, like marriage. How much do you reverence it? Just marriage in and of itself. Because when you do, you start to move different and you make different decisions. But just because you made decisions now, yes, if it's God's calling you to go to the courthouse tomorrow and get married, absolutely do that. Like that's a very honorable decision. But let's also be real and honest and say that just because you start to make good decisions today doesn't mean that you're not going to have scars and pain from the decisions that you made yesterday that you're now bringing into your marriage because you didn't do it right the whole time.
Absolutely. And the Lord can help walk you through that season. If you find yourself dealing with consequences, he can give you perspective and help you as you're going through that. And if you're watching this episode and you're like, this all sounds good, but I still don't really feel like I know how to practically walk a relationship out, keeping the Lord involved. We actually have an episode that will link practical ways to trust God with your dating life, no matter what stage you're currently in. So whether you're single, dating, engaged, we walk you through some practical ways that you can keep the Lord involved and trust him through the process. So definitely check that out if you're looking for more ways to learn how to actually do this practically, because that's really important and something we touch on. So I love that we talked about this topic because it's unfortunately probably only going to be more and more prevalent as far as cohabitating before marriage. But if you watch this episode and you made it all the way to the end, you hopefully have a better understanding that it's not best, and hopefully you realize a simple statement that God's ways are better than our ways.
Yes.
Even if we don't feel like it or see it, it's the truth. And when you obey that, you'll see the fruit that comes from honoring the Lord in your life. So this has been another episode of the W Podcast. We'll see y'all next week.
Bye.
Thanks for watching this video.
To get more Christian relationship advice, subscribe to our channel.
And make sure you check out our other videos as well.